Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, What Libraries Need to Know Now About the Research Data Lifecycle, which is sponsored by Elsevier. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. And I'll put some links in the chat to where you can register for upcoming Choice ACRL webinars and watch previous webinar recordings. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers and to submit any comments. I will answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions that you like or would like to be addressed. Also, there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version and where to access today's slides. And with that, we are ready to get started, so I will hand it over to Emily and Tracy.
Great, thank you so much, Sabrina. It's so great to be here. I think I just advanced too far. There we go. So great to be here. So great to be with all of you today. So we are excited to talk to you about what libraries need to know now about the research data lifecycle. And we're going to start out with just a few introductions of ourselves, but we're also curious to know a little bit more about you and why you're here. So if you're so inclined, and this is completely optional, you can answer these two questions in the Q&A. So why are you here today? What brought you here today? And what are you hoping to learn? So again, just type those into the Q&A, and our colleague Liz is standing by in the background and is going to keep an eye on that for us. So yeah, so who are we? We are Emily and Tracy. I'm Emily Singley, and I'm in a library relations role at Elsevier. I've been here for about a year, previously worked in academic libraries for many years. Since coming to Elsevier, I've had the opportunity to work pretty closely with our research data management teams. And I'm really excited to begin to share some of what I've been learning with all of you today. And so Tracy, over to you.
Yes, hi everybody and welcome. Thank you for attending. My name is Tracy Snowden. I am a product manager for Elsevier, specifically overseeing Mendeley data, which is our free generalist repository. And I am very pleased to also be representing our partnership with the NIH and representing my co-opetition partners and the GREI community. GREI stands for Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, and I'm going to share a little bit more about that later today. I come with about 14 years of technology experience and specifically serving the A&G sector.
Great, fantastic. And I'm just taking a quick look at the all these great comments that are coming in. Thank you so much. It looks like we have a wide range of answers. Some brand new librarians, congratulations on becoming a librarian. Some people who are taking on new roles, some people who are interested to learn about new developments, and everyone sounds really excited to be able to support researchers, which is what I think we all care about. So fantastic, thank you for that. All right, so what are we going to cover today? We are going to do some background into what is the research data lifecycle, and of course talk about why does it matter. But we're going to spend the bulk of the time today walking through that lifecycle step by step. We're going to take a walk in the researcher's shoes, going through their research data journey from start to finish, and discuss opportunities we see for libraries to provide support for that journey along the way. And we are going to end with plenty of time for Q&A and discussion. And as Sabrina mentioned at the outset, if you think of a question or a comment, just throw it in while you're thinking about it. You don't need to wait until the end. All right, so let's get started. So what is the research data lifecycle and why does it matter? So definition, the way we're sort of thinking about this is the research data lifecycle is everything that happens to research data from the minute it gets created during a research project all the way through to what happens after you're done with the research project. And all of that data from beginning to end needs to be organized, stored, and managed throughout the life cycle. And so we call that research data management, or you often see it abbreviated as RDM. So we'll be talking about that as well. And how are we defining research data? It's really anything that's created during any kind of research project. So, and almost all research, if you think about it, involves some kind of data, whether it's interview data from maybe a social sciences study to audiovisual content, might be big scientific data sets. It could be everything from huge data sets to just simple spreadsheets, but it all kind of needs to be managed.
So Emily, just since we're thinking about this from the perspective of the researcher, why should the researcher care about managing their data? I mean, it's something they can do however they want, right? It's their data.
Yeah, right. So exactly, Tracy. So why not just let them do whatever they want? Why does it matter? And I think to get to that, some of you have mentioned this in the comments a little bit. There have been some interesting developments, particularly here in the United States, around policy, right? And so it's not just, the answer is not just because it's the right thing to do, although that's always been true, but because now it's actually a requirement, right? So we're starting to see these policies coming out from different organizations and in the federal government. So you've probably seen that the National Institutes of Health, which is a big funder of research, came out with their data management and sharing policy this year. So this is now in effect. This is a current policy that researchers, any researcher getting an NIH grant needs to comply with, where they need to have a data management plan. They need to have spelled out how they're going to manage and share their data. Additionally, about a year ago, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which you've heard probably as OSTP from the White House, came out with guidance that recommends that all federally funded research has to make their data publicly available. So this is not currently a policy, but it is a recommendation that all granting agencies, all federal granting agencies, have to have some kind of data sharing policy in place by 2025. So this is starting to kind of hit us within the next couple of years. So that's something that is, and it's important to note, we often think of OSTP as just applying to the published article, like making your publication open, but it actually applies to the underlying data as well. So that's really important to understand, and it applies to all granting agencies. And then the other thing, and this is something I didn't know about until I came to work for a publisher, is it's not just the governmental policies, it's also policies upon publication that different journals or publishers are asking their authors to do. So publishers may have, and increasingly do have, data sharing policies in place that require authors to outline how they're going to share their data, why they're not going to share their data if they're not going to share it. So that's another thing that's really important to understand. And I'll just say that, you know, why would publishers do this? It seems kind of like, why can't I just, you know, publish my article? It really increases the research integrity of the article if you not only write up your findings, but you also show your underlying data. So we're doing it, and other publishers are doing it to kind of increase the trust and integrity of the research we're publishing. All right. So what does this all mean for researchers? It essentially adds more administrative burden throughout the entire research life cycle. And from the grant application through data gathering and organization, all the way through to publication and preservation. So now what we want to do is take a step through that life cycle from the perspective of a researcher. So Tracy, what are these steps?
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, Emily. I saw a comment from someone who's in the audience today about, I want to know what's the role of the library worker in this? How can we help? I was recently on a call with one of the key head research officers, a library worker who was a former researcher at the University of Canberra. And one of the things that they stated was that administrative burden for researchers is becoming more and more cumbersome, is becoming more and more of a problem. So they see their role, and actually a combined role, as easing that burden. How can we simplify that process? And they said, wouldn't it be nice if there was just a unified, simple, concise checklist that would walk the researcher all the way from step one, applying for the grant, through, storage and preservation of data. And so, this is our attempt at providing that. But they're very proactively working on providing that in-house for their researchers, with links that send them directly to the guidance, directly to the tools. And so, we're going to be providing, just to head this question off at the pass, we're going to be providing this deck with associated links for your benefit so that you can support your researchers in that way. So let's go ahead and kick it off, Emily. Let's start with step one. All
righty, good. So step one, first, if it's going to be federally funded, you have to apply for a grant, right? So, there's tons of grants you can apply for, federal and not. And we already talked a little bit about this. I just want to reiterate that there's tons of granting agencies out there. And all of them in the United States, at least, are going to have data management and sharing requirements within the next couple of years. And I think it's important that folks working at universities where researchers are applying for these grants understand that your humanities researchers and even your librarians, right, your IMLS grants, those are all federal agencies. And I think humanities folks sometimes they're not thinking about this as much as the scientists who are kind of already used to the NIH policy that's been out for a year. So that's coming. So you apply for your grant, that's step one. And then if it's an NIH grant in particular, you're required to submit a data management plan. But this is best practice for anything that you're doing. You should have a data management plan, whether or not your research is funded. It's just a great way to sort of start yourself off, start your research project off, and have a really good plan for how you're going to organize your data. So data management plans, basically it's a document. It's a document that spells out how you're going to organize your data, where you're going to store it, how you're going to preserve it, when you're going to deaccession it, if and when you're going to deaccession it. So it's a really good thing to have on hand. And I have a question for the audience here. So again, if you want to weigh in, this would be great. Does your library or someone at your library already support the creation of data management plans? The library I used to work at, most recently Boston College, our scholarly communications office supported the creation of data management plans so that they could come to the library or they could look at our website. We had LibGuides that would kind of spell out resources around how to create a data management plan. One really great resource that a lot of libraries point to was created by the California Digital Library. They have a fantastic website called DMP Tool that gives you templates, it gives you examples, it walks you through how to create your plan. So, question to the audience, are you guys familiar with this? Have you been doing this? Is it something you're trying to put in place? I strongly recommend it. And then the next step is you wait and then you get your money, hopefully. So that's a really nice step. We have nothing to say about that. And then the next step is you, as a researcher, you've got your funding, fantastic, and you are going to conduct your research. And there's quite a few sort of sub steps in this, so we're gonna kind of walk through a bunch of them. taking a look at the Q&A here. See if anybody's weighed in on the data manager. Yep. Yeah, a lot of people, DMP tool, absolutely. Yeah, great. So that is, again, very common place where library support is front and center in terms of the DMP, the data management plan. All right, so conducting research, the first step is to have a method, a method in place on how you're going to sort of intentionally and responsibly organize your data as you're gathering it in your research project. Now, again, if you've already written your data management plan, you've probably already thought through this, so you should be good to go. But things like your file formats, your naming conventions, how you're going to store it, and versioning, and how often you're going to back it up, and all of that for all of your research outputs needs to happen. And again, is this a library role? Absolutely, I think it is, because libraries are good at organizing things, and this is an organizational step right here. I was talking to a librarian the other day who told me a story about how, she had a researcher come to her at the start of a project, which she really likes to see. So this is like a data management librarian who was trying to put together a spreadsheet for collecting research data on a social sciences project. And the librarian took one look at this spreadsheet, was like, this is not going to fly. You've got kind of combined data in columns in ways that at the end of your project, when you're trying to tabulate all of this and put your findings together, is going to be a nightmare. Yeah. So able to sort of, steer that researcher in the right way to make sure that their data was going to be easier to work with, saving them a lot of time. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about this guidance, and it is guidance, is just that, it does have purpose. And that purpose is ultimately to benefit all of society in the long term. But, whenever new guidance comes out, there's always a little bit of that extra lift and figuring things out. Another question or comment that had come up is just, what is the role of the library worker in this? And, what we've seen is, with the evolution of research data management, we've seen that new career opportunities, leveraging technology, leveraging expertise, subject matter expertise begin to develop. So this is certainly an evolutionary process, but to your point, man, what a savior the library worker can be for the researcher, right?
Exactly.
Another piece of this guidance that I love is the concept of data reuse. So when you're conducting your research, just as in all things in life, look for efficiency alongside efficacy by considering data that may be already, and research that may be already conducted that can support your current research, right? So where do you look for that? You can search for reusable data in a variety of repositories and avoid reinventing that wheel. On this screen, you'll see, for example, Mendeley data, the ability to what that looks like when you use the search functionality. You can search by publication, funder, author, a variety of metadata, and you can see the results that would be pulled up. A lot of times there will be versioning. So it's really, part of this NIH guidance is causing repositories, particularly generalist repositories, to get better about how we do metadata, search functionality for reuse. So that's fantastic. If we move to the next slide, we'll also see an example of encourage not only thinking about how can I reuse the data, but how can I pay it forward to make it easier for someone else, right? So one of the trends that we're seeing now amongst researchers is let's go ahead and proactively put in those steps for reproducibility, make it easier from the get-go. This also, I have to say, is it's something that earns you brownie points with funders when they see that you have a history of that. So definitely a great thing to support your researchers with is making it easier for them to provide those steps for reproducibility.
Right. Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And what about data collections?
Yeah, so this is a great example actually from one of our co-opetition partners, Figshare. And I loved this one because it demonstrates, searching and finding a multimodal collection of really large scale data sets. Collections of comparative data are becoming increasingly popular, more visible and easier to find. And it really just makes the researcher's job easier. So, in this process, we're talking about that data reuse, and so much of that comes down to collaboration. So, one of the things that I'll say about collaboration, there's many, many reasons why you may opt for a collaboration tool. Particularly, one of the things I'm seeing, Emily, I think we've discussed this, is that more and more we're seeing researchers collaborating across institutions, across geographies,
Yeah.
in order to receive the funding that's needed to really complete specific research. So that's certainly a very, very valid reason for wanting a collaboration tool. But even internally, collaboration tools support varying permission levels that might be needed to facilitate research input and then subsequent review processes. And then at this time, to my knowledge, I know that both Figshare and Mendeley Data, I think, do have those project and collaboration tools built into their repositories. And I believe they're built into the free repositories for Figshare as well. But I would certainly check other repositories, especially Generalist repositories from the GREI initiative, to check their websites, see if updates have been made or will be made to support collaboration. And then if we can move to the next slide, I just want to highlight, when you're choosing a collaboration space, there may be more than a few handful of features to consider, but definitely security, compliance, data interoperability, storage limitations. These are crucial. Make sure that at a minimum, your tool of choice adheres to those compliance-based policies that your institution may have for that.
Yeah, definitely great point. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so, moving from the collaboration space, we've got our data, what do we do next?
What do we do next? Right. What's the next step? Right. So we're sort of moving out of that core research phase where you've collaborated with a lot of people across countries, across time zones. You've started to put your data into a collaborative space, but now you're getting ready to publish. So now we're moving on to the next step. And publishing means both publishing your article, your findings, et cetera, but also depositing your data somewhere publicly. So when you were collaborating, you might have been collaborating not publicly, so just sharing amongst your research partners because your data wasn't quite ready for prime time. So now you're thinking about how to get it out to the world. Before you can do that, it often needs to be curated, it needs to be cleaned up, it needs to be maybe anonymized if there was human subjects data, sensitive data. You might want to create some snazzy charts, tables, visualizations, etc. And again, there might be some licensing or copyright considerations that you may want to think about in terms of how you want that data to be reused, if you do. So all of this, I think, again, we're posing this question: what is the library's role at this point where you're getting that data ready for deposit? And I can say that I think, again, this is an inflection point where the libraries really do often step in, and I think it's a great place for the libraries to step in, because often the repository, whether it's an institutional repository or a data repository, might be managed by the library. There might be requirements at your institution where researchers have to just deposit their data sets in their institutional repository. And there are data repository librarians. We had one that I worked with very closely at my last institution, who has this kind of expertise, both around copyright, around cleanup, and migration of data. And we also had a data visualization librarian, someone whose full-time job it was to create visualizations, which she always had lots of customers, let me tell you. So this is definitely a place where libraries can step in. But where are you going to put it? Like, where are you going to put this data? So you have to choose a repository. So Tracy's going to kind of step us through that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Emily. And before I do, I just want to say that I have been seeing a lot of add-on comments. So thank you so much for sharing when there's a tool that works well for you, or providing a link to additional or supplemental guidance. We really appreciate that, because we can only go so deep with these slides during the session. So keep that coming, guys. Thanks. And we did have a question specifically about choosing a repository that I saw earlier in the flow. Of course, we're mostly waiting to answer the questions till the end, but I did want to address that. Hopefully this will address this question. If there are supplemental questions, please let me know, because we're really going through the basics here. So first and foremost, the NIH has put out a scientific data management and sharing policy. I have linked that on this slide so you can very, very easily access it. They do provide very specific guidance about selecting a data repository. But the main thing to note is that if a domain-specific repository is available, subject matter specific, that is the first repository that they would encourage you to choose. So that's the main takeaway. And if not, if there is no disciplinary repository that is preferred, then you can resort to a generalist repository. The NIH has also provided some desirable characteristics that you should look for when you are selecting a repository. So this slide is particularly highlighting those. And then the NIH has also provided a comparison chart, a chart comparing the repository. So Emma, if we can advance to the next slide, and you can click this link. It's going to send you to Zenodo, which is also shout out to one of our other GREI partners. And if I don't shout out all the partners today, I apologize. I used whatever was relevant to the framework that we had here, but we love you all equally. So Zenodo has been storing quite a bit of the files that have been, or the assets that have been a result of the GREI initiative. And this one in particular is relatively thorough, although I will add it is not necessarily up to date, because we are doing so much consistently. So again, I do encourage you to go to individual websites to find out, what's new, what's now, etc. And then finally, the last point that I want to make is, if you have an institutional, an IR, or a data repository, or both in combination, whether free or commercial, even though interoperability is now a key aspect of the policy, there may be institutional value to recommending that. Maybe you have licenses, or maybe you just want them to utilize the free version for that to be able to, easily interface, etc. So I've spent a lot of time referring to the GREI initiative, and as promised, I do want to make sure that for those of you who may not be familiar with it, that you are familiar. So now I can give a shout out to all of the awardees. You can see all of them listed, all of their logos here. And you can also get a good understanding of, what are the expected outcomes of this. So if you have any questions about GREI or any participating repositories, I'd really be happy to field those, or happy to connect you to a peer at one of the other generalist repositories, and my contact information will be available at the end of this slide deck. So as mentioned, I do product manage Mendeley data, which is Elsevier's free generalist repository. If we advance to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about how Mendeley data supports research data management workflow. Particularly, we do adhere to the FAIR principles. Basically, all that means, to break that, because we love our acronyms, right? Like, it's crazy. There've already been like 15 so far. But just to break that down, we want to ensure that data is easy to find, easy to access, interoperable, and easy to reuse. It's really important to note this is not just compliance for compliance sake. This guidance exists to progress open science and the many benefits that brings to the world. And I'm looking forward, Emily, as we talked about in the abstract, to sharing some of these real world use cases a little later on in the webinar. All right. So next up, depositing. So when it comes to depositing your data, there are definitely some basic factors that you really need to consider. We've already talked about size, storage, media types. This is an interesting one in my interactions with library workers and my interactions with researchers. And Emily, I think you've said this too, that now data is coming in all different media types. So making sure that the repositories you select allows you to upload the media types that are specific to the research you're conducting. And then finally, file sharing integrations. This is obviously critically important that, you can easily use the integrations that work for you based on any type of storage repos that you might have in-house, or that may be in alignment with your compliance, with your policies. The other thing that I'd like to mention, if you look at the right-hand side of this slide, is just that most of the generalist repositories do provide FAQs. So that's a great page to just hit up. And again, make sure that, everything that you need to know about the generalist repository is up to date, because again, thanks to GREI, enhancements are constantly being made and released.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Great.
So, next up, I'd like to give you an example. Most of the repositories that I've seen have a similar interface, but not all interfaces are exactly alike. They do share quite a bit in common. So I'm highlighting Mendeley data today because obviously that's the repository with which I am most familiar. But please do note that you can create free accounts on any or all of the repositories to test them out. I do believe that many of them you can sign in with your ORCID ID or some other identifier. And just want to go over the basic data set creation protocol here. So, just essentially in the interface, creating a title for your data set, making sure that all contributors are listed, being able to add multiple contributors, providing a clear description, providing steps for reproducibility, as we've discussed before, uploading those files, dragging and dropping, utilizing those integrations, etc. And then in most cases, we're working with that data before we publish. So, checking out in the repositories, what are the publishing features and functionality at my disposal? Is there an integration where my data can, easily integrate? Can I set an embargo date? Can I make some data public and some data private, and, or all, or none of the above, etc. And then making sure that obviously the data citations and the metadata are, going to DataCite or ROR or Ringgold, etc. So that it is easily searchable. And getting that unique identifier. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Emily.
Great. So that was a ton of great information about all the different free open repositories that the NIH has sponsored. And I think there was a question in the chat also about, does your data have to be open and free, and what do you have to have it completely open? There's a question about copyright, and the NIH and these other federal funders are the mandate is that it has to be open, right? But it's up to the researcher as to whether they want to kind of, you have to cite it with accreditation and so forth. So sometimes researchers will turn to libraries for that kind of, I want to keep some control over my data set, and how do I do that with different CC licenses and things like that. But the NIH, with all of these repositories, it does absolutely have to be open, and all of these repositories are funded by the NIH, and so they are free of charge to researchers and to institutions. So great questions coming in the chat. And again, we'll try and get to as many of them as we can at the end as well.
Yes.
Another question about whether OSTP covers states, and no, as far as I know, there aren't state policies right now, although there might be, but those are all at the federal level. So
that's my understanding as well.
Yeah. All right, so great. So now moving right along in our life cycle, you've cleaned up all your data, you've figured out whether you can put it into a disciplinary repository, and if there's no disciplinary repository, you've picked one of these GREI repositories or your institutional repository for a generalist repository, and you're ready to publish. So publishing, you're going to write up your findings, you're going to pick a journal, you're going to send in your submission. And I want to just very quickly share another tidbit that I learned coming to a publisher, which I didn't know before as a librarian, which is that the actual submission systems of publishers also have data sharing and data policy. So remember earlier on, I talked about how publishers, certain journals are actually requiring data sharing during the submission policy, the process. And so I just want to show you what that actually looks like. And again, it's this best practice of making sure your data set and other kinds of research outputs remain affiliated with your findings, with your article. So this is actually showing the screenshot from a journal submission system that's used by many publishers, including by Elsevier. So you can see here, there's an option to upload your data. There's an option to provide a URL. There's also, not yet in ours, but other publishers have this already, where you can just sort of link out directly to a commonly used repository. And you can see there's a whole bunch of them listed here. And that's going to make it really super easy for researchers to just kind of point to their data.
Yeah. If I can just mention about that too, Emily, because a question did come up in the chat earlier about that. That is something that we've put forth or to our champion at the NIH for consideration for GREI, and we are looking into, offering that to as many repositories through our integration partner as possible as well. So
great. And then this is just a quick screenshot showing how data availability statements are also asked for upon submission, and this is kind of how they go into the system. And then this is what it looks like within the publication. So I'm just showing an article and how it appears in a journal. You'll see in the article itself, there's a section for data availability. That's where the statement would live. There's a section for supplemental information. That's where you'd see that link out to the data set, the link to the repository. So again, the whole package, it's not just the write-up, it's also all of this supplemental information that researchers are being encouraged to keep together. And yeah, okay, so now we're published. What do we do now?
We're cranking through these steps. So this is another area where, in my opinion, the NIH has made it relatively easy to follow their guidance. We've provided a link for you here to their post-award monitoring and reporting page. So you can simply go here if you have received NIH grant or funding. And I think most awarding bodies are providing this type of guidance. Really, really smart idea is just to review this before you start, so that you know what the expectations are. And of course, that comes along with the grant application process. But yeah, pretty much, I think enough said there. One thing that I do want to mention is, and this is something that many of the generalist repositories either have now in place or are working on getting in place, is making it very easy for a researcher or collaborator to add funder metadata. So this gives you an example of, how it looks in Mendeley data, the ability to add a funder, add a grant ID, multiple funders, and to be able to see on the right-hand side, you can see what that looks like when someone searches and views that data set.
Great. And then how do researchers get their data out to the world and promote it and share it more widely?
Yeah, this is a big step, right? This is an important step, and I think this is becoming increasingly important. And Emily, I think this is also a huge part of what the institution and the library can do, to help support that visibility. So one thing that I'll say is, institutional repositories are widely accepted now, and they are used to showcase, promote, and share data. There are some fun new content types as a means of showcase that are emerging, in addition to kind of standard publications and associated data sets. For example, exhibits, using an institutional repository for that real-time online event. So actually, getting people to show up and see the data, maybe, getting some PR around it, et cetera. And then enhanced collections. So again, we talked about that a little bit earlier, this concept of multimodal collections, or even across institutions pulling collections together. And as promised, we did promise some real world use cases. So I'd like to introduce a few institutions and their researchers who made some serious real world impact using an institutional repository and data repository at Elsevier. But I would love if I do have any of my GREI counterparts on the call to, feel free to share a few of those as well. So as an example, Professor Dennison, Utah State, his articles were found in their IR by a CEO, and they were subcontracted to NASA and the Air Force. This resulted in a pretty significant industry collaboration contract and significantly more funding. If we can move on to the next example, which is the Iowa State University Research Foundation. They uploaded about 300 patents to their IR and received more than 30,000 downloads from 3,000 institutions. You can see some big logos on that one. The next example is Thomas Crowther, who is an environmental studies fellow at Yale, who interestingly collected over 420,000 data points about trees. His research was featured in numerous globally recognized media outlets such as NPR, NBC, and the BBC. And then finally, and I think this is one that has such incredible real world impact, especially in a post-pandemic environment. Aurora Healthcare published an article with supporting data in their Journal of Patient-Centered Research and Reviews. That happened to provide some pretty timely regional intel that helped prevent further outbreak of a bacterial crisis, which had resulted in 20 deaths initially. So I love that one. And moving on to almost there, to the final step, and then we're moving into Q&A. So I wanted to talk briefly about reporting and tracking. So some of us are analytics nerds. Others of us, not so much. We tend to shut off after the showcase piece, but tools do exist to support this. And it's critically important because if you've done all the work, you've gotten the grant, you've done the research, you've showcased it, you've got to be able to understand the value of that work to the world. And then you utilize those analytics and metrics to, go out and get further funding or further visibility, et cetera. So reporting and tracking is really, really important. And tools do now exist to support tracking usage, mentions, even social media metrics, so we can understand the viability and the impact of our work. This is a case study on research data, tracking research data. I want to show you a slide that highlights the importance of really ensuring that you're tracking data across repositories. So if we can move to the next slide, please, Emily. As you can see from this slide at a glance, there are numerous institutions and their repositories, as you can see in column 1. In column 2, you can see how much of that data was harvested from their actual institutional repository. And then in column 3, you can see how much data was actually in all of the other repositories.
I love this slide because as someone who used to run an institutional repository, we always sort of wondered why our numbers were kind of low. And we always suspected, well, we know they're putting their stuff somewhere, but where is it? And then the NIH came out with their guidance and said, we prefer, the disciplinary repositories, right? So if you're an astrophysicist, you should be in archive, right? No questions asked. Great, but then the university doesn't know that the astrophysicist has put their research and their data into archive because the astrophysicist probably doesn't go to their librarian and tell them that, right? So I think this is great, really shows, yep, most of your stuff, it's somewhere else, right?
Yeah. And so if you can move to the next slide, this is just, this is an example of one of the tools that you can utilize is Data Monitor for this. And University of Groningen was an example of a university that's had a great experience leveraging Data Monitor to, support with, making sure that, particularly relieving manual lift and supporting the future of the program. Next slide, please. All right, and then this is a very simple screenshot of what it might look like if it's integrated with your institutional repository. So just look at the big box and orange arrow, and then also sources and filtering types would be featured down the left-hand navigation. Okay, we're almost to the finish line, and I want to make sure we have ample time for Q&A. Emily, preserving your data. Final step.
So that was a whirlwind tour through the research data lifecycle. The very last step, we've already kind of talked about this with preserving your data, because if you did your data management plan, which we talked about at the beginning, you've already decided how you're going to preserve your data, where you're going to put it, for how long, etc. So it's important to, this is something that sometimes institutions aren't thinking about enough, I think, but they've started to think about it a lot, especially with these new mandates coming out. Is where are we going to store it? How long are we going to store it? And what is the governance and the policies that we're going to have around that? And it's not just the research data that gets published or put into a repository. It's also all of that unpublished raw data, which can be really challenging in terms of storage, just kind of getting enough space on a server, that's generated during that research project, right? So that might exist on a hard drive. It might exist, on a server under somebody's desk. And so you sort of have to have a policy around how that's managed and deaccessioned. So I want to kind of throw this out to the audience as well, in terms of whether your institution has these kinds of data preservation governance policies in place. One of the things that I've been hearing from librarians, especially post NIH policy, is the policy has actually really triggered great conversations on their campuses, at their universities, at their institutions, around data compliance. So we're starting to see these coalitions of librarians and libraries and IT departments and data ethics officers and compliance officers and the Office of Research all coming together to try and put the governance in place. So kind of curious to see how people are doing that. And I think next we have there's just one slide here with some resources that we wanted to highlight. I do want to give a shout out to the Research Data Management Librarian Academy, because this is a free research data management professional development program that is fantastic. It's a partnership between Harvard University Medical Library, the Simmons University Library School, and Elsevier sponsors this program. So I've had a really great time getting involved with this and recommend it. RDAP is another great community to be involved in. So is the Research Data Alliance community. And we have a shortcut to Elsevier resources that we have been talking about today as well. And I think with that, I am going to ask Liz to tee up some questions. I also want to remind everybody that the way we set up the Q&A today is with the upvote feature. So you should see, a little option to little thumbs up there that you can say, yeah, I want to hear more about this or that. So I know we had a bunch of questions that came in. So Liz, where are we at with questions?
Yeah, so I think one of the first ones that we'd like to ask here is, what if you don't have specifically dedicated librarians, and what are the responsibilities the library needed to have for this RDM librarian role?
Yeah, I saw that as I was kind of keeping an eye on the queue, and I love that question. I love that question because I've worked at like huge libraries with like 1 million people with all specialized roles, but I've also worked at tiny libraries with like 5 of us all trying to wear like 10,000 different hats. And it's very, very challenging. So I hear you, and absolutely that can be tough. But I think anyone can do this work. I think there's sort of, there is a lot of expertise and knowledge that can be gained, but there's great communities out there. There's great programs out there where you can help you gain the skills that you need and the knowledge that you need. And I know in this webinar, it was like a flyby, right? So you're probably like, oh my God, there's so much. But there's like RDAP is a great community. They have a fantastic conference in the spring around research data management. RDMLA, it's a modular program that's completely online and you can do it at your own pace. So there's resources out there. You don't have to have the title, right? You don't have to be the data management librarian or whatever. I think liaison librarians do a lot of this work, subject librarians, reference librarians, like lots of different kinds of library workers do this kind of work at libraries large and small.
There's another question in the chat just asking us to bring up the slide with the, do we, in parentheses, you, have a data management plan, the one with the bullets? Can we bring that back up very quickly?
Sure. Oh yeah, the data management plan bullets. That is from the DMP tools site. It's somewhere back at the beginning. Yeah, if you go to the dmptool.org, they have great examples of data management plans, and you can actually see one. And this was always a complete mystery to me when I was working in libraries, and I knew people did this, but I didn't know anything about it. And they talk about the DMP tool, and I thought, yeah. So it's good to actually go. Anyone can just go and look at it. It's way back here somewhere. Yeah, it's this one.
We also had a question about how up to date DMP tool is. I don't know the answer to that necessarily, like, because it's not, you know, inside of our of Elsevier, but you know, as far as I know, it's quite popular and useful.
It's popular and useful, but it's a little long in the tooth, and I'm excited to announce they just got a Mellon grant, I believe,
okay.
to revamp it. So yeah, I think it's still a great resource, but it was really nice to see them get the funding, because it is, you know, it is open source, it's grant funded, it's, you know, it's one library doing this work. So it was nice to see them get that. So I think we'll see that become, especially with this policy environment, we'll see that tool continue to ramp up.
Fantastic.
There's another question in here, and I think this one was very popular. This one is, what about data sets that contain sensitive information? Are there rules and regulations that work around them so that the data can be accessible to all?
Great question. Yeah, sensitive data, medical data, human subjects data, right? All of that is controlled by your institution's institutional review board usually. And there's, I mean, I'm married to a researcher who, you know, works with animals. Actually, you wouldn't believe the kind of, it's even worse than the kind of rules that are around humans. It's like they really have to be very careful with that stuff. So there's all sorts of rules and regulations that may be coming from your institution. And that should be written into your data management plan and into your grant. And you might have noticed when I brought up that example of an actual article with a data availability statement, and it said, you know, unless you can't, we can't share this data because it's got sensitive human subject data in it. So there's times when you just can't, like, and that's okay. Like if you try, sometimes if you anonymize it, it loses all meaning, right? You can try and anonymize it and make it accessible that way, but sometimes you just can't, and it has to remain private. So it really depends on your project. It depends on your data. It depends on what you're being required to do by your institutional review board on your campus or at your university. But yes, it runs the gamut. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't share your data. And the NIH understands that, you know, the government understands. I mean, Department of Defense doesn't share anything, I guarantee you. So there's just times when stuff doesn't get shared.
Yeah, the only thing that I can add to that, Emily, is just that sometimes data can't be shared for a period of time.
That's very true.
And that's where an embargo date can come, you know, can be useful. You can set that in when you're public or when you're uploading your data set so that, you know, once the cat's out of the bag, so to speak, it can be available for open access.
And sometimes it's things like I've been involved in interview studies where, you know, the participants said, you know, once we are all dead, you can share this. Sometimes it's like 75 years, right? Like you wouldn't ever talked on this project is no longer with us, and that's okay too, right?
Yeah.
So another good question here is, are data repositories linking data with publications and other research downstream so that the entire research cycle is connected, particularly since there are such issues with replication and analysis of outsourced data?
So is it linked downstream, you mean beyond just the article, but sort of in aggregators and things like that, I'm guessing? Is that, Tracy, is that how you would interpret that?
I'm not sure. I was thinking about the editorial manager example that we had provided earlier, but I wasn't sure if there was something beyond that.
Yeah, I think the goal, so you'll often hear the term like open science. the concept. So there's open data, but then the broader concept is open science, right? So what we're trying to work towards here is that your article, your underlying data, your code, your software, everything that went into that project is sort of a package of information. It's sort of going beyond the traditional kind of your research output is a text-based article, right? It's beyond that. It's like your research output from whatever your research was is all of that stuff that went into it. So it's replicatable, it's reusable, and it's transparent. So transparency is really important so that people can understand everything that you did. There's challenges around how to keep all that together. And so you can see, as I pointed out, you can see publishers trying to do that with making it easier to link to things and making it easier to, put it right into the article. Here's how you can get to this stuff. But boy, we still have work to do. There's so much, there's so many complications in trying to get everything kind of attached together. And then I was thinking from your question, I was thinking about, you used the word downstream, like, well, okay, so, the journal, a publisher puts it up in a web page, but then it gets aggregated by other, aggregation organizations, and it might go into different repositories. How do you keep it always the same? And so we have people within Elsevier who think about this and work on this and work on different working groups in NISO and other places to try and think about metadata standards and, keeping things consistent, but there's still a lot of work to do.
For sure. There are a couple of more questions, and I know I'm sensitive to the time here. So there's one that asked, how is Data Monitor different from Pure? And I don't know if you guys can handle that or if you'd like me to take that one.
Liz, if you want to kick off, I can chime in.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to be very brief here, just keeping my eye on the clock. In the context of research data management, Data Monitor will harvest allows a librarian to harvest their researchers' data from one of over 2,000 or more generalist repositories and open source repositories, and allows them to enrich that data with the data that they have already tied, I believe, to Scopus. And then that allows you to kind of send that information over to Pure, and Pure allows you to analyze that data as a holistic analysis and showcasing tool.
Yeah, and Data Monitor could be coupled with a plethora of repositories, or like any, right? So, or IRs. So it only does the data harvesting. That's what it does. And then it feeds in the analytics into the repository.
For sure. It definitely allows librarians to get a better handle on where their data is located. So then another good question here is, what is the best way to get citations?
What is the best way to get citations?
I think that's in the context of research data, and I think that also just linking your data sets. I know we've seen a lot of citations increased when linking a data set to your publication.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There's been studies that have been done that show that if you link your data set, your article citations go up by about 25%. The number of times your article is cited. We didn't talk much about, or really at all, about data identifiers and kind of how do you find data citations. And so, and actually, I'm glad I have this slide up still, because one of the things that's required when you're managing your data is that your data set has an identifier, not just your publication or yourself. You have an ORCID, hopefully, because you're an author. Your publication has a DOI, but your data set needs to have a DOI as well. And so as you're citing data, you should always cite it with the identifier. This is increasingly becoming a requirement, right? So that we're having consistent citations, consistent pointers to data sets that are things like DOIs that are persistent identifiers, right? So this is becoming the best practice and the norm to citing data. So I hope that helps a little bit. I don't know if Tracy, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, no, and I think that also, I'm not familiar with Portico as an archiver particularly, but I think that also addresses a little bit of Rachel's question, because, those data sets do have DOIs. They do tie to a variety of systems, DataCite. I think we mentioned ROR, ROR, Ringgold, etc. So
and preservation piece, yeah.
Yeah, they're living and breathing out there regardless of where they're housed. So
yeah, exactly. So having those persistent identifiers is critical for preservation. Right.
One other thing that I'll add, in addition to preservation, talking about, promotion, et cetera, the richer your metadata is, similar to kind of SEO, like the richer your metadata is, the more searchable it becomes as well.
Great. I think we are pretty much at time, so I'm going to pass this back to Sabrina. Thank you
Great.
for all the fantastic questions, by the way. This is, I know we didn't get to all of them, but thank you so much for a really rich discussion.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'll just echo Emily and say thank you to Emily and Tracy for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to Liz for moderating the discussion and the Q&A. And thanks to our attendees for your engagement with your questions and your comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording, as well as where to access today's slides. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the session and hope to see you again in the near future on another webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.